All right, guys, we're going to talk about section 5 now, which deals with the Pythagorean theorem. So previously, we solved quadratic equation by using the square root property. Now we're going to solve problems by using the Pythagorean theorem and then determine whether a triangle is a right triangle. So some new vocab, you've probably seen a lot of these before, but hypotenuse and legs of a triangle, something called a converse, we're not talking about a shoe there either, and something called a Pythagorean triple. So Pythagorean theorem, in a right triangle, the sides opposite the right angle is called the hypotenuse. It is always the longest. The other two sides are called the leg. So the right angle is where the exact corner is in a triangle. The side opposite that is the hypotenuse. It's always going to be the longest side because it's always across from the largest angle. So if you have a right triangle, the right triangle has to have a 90-degree angle. That's a definition of a right triangle. And then the other two angles also have to add up to 90, which means both of them have to be less than 90 if they're going to add up to 90. Because remember, if you remember, all the angles in a triangle add up to what? Yeah, 180. So if a triangle is a right triangle, then the square of the length of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares of the lengths of the legs. In other words, the familiar formula a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So if you square this side, and add them together, it equals the square of the hypotenuse. Okay, very useful. So find each missing length, and then if necessary, you got to round your answer to the nearest hundredth. So if I know two sides, the two legs of this triangle, 10 and 24, and I want to figure out the hypotenuse, I use the Pythagorean theorem and plug in what I know. In the Pythagorean theorem, the C is always, always, always the hypotenuse, the longest side. And it's always what the other two are squared and added up and equal to, okay? So the 10 and 24 would go in for A and B. Now, it doesn't matter if you use the 10 as the A and the 24 as the B, or if you use the 10 as the B and the 24 as the A. They just, neither one of those can be the C because it's not the hypotenuse, okay? So you square both of them, add them together, and you get 676. Then you just take the square root. Now, when you solve an equation and you take the square root, you have to account for the plus or the minus. But in Pythagorean theorem problems, since you're dealing with lengths of a triangle, side lengths can't be negative, so the missing length has to be positive 26. Since they didn't put units, like it's not inches, centimeters, squares, feet, miles, it's just 26 units. If it were, had units on it, it would be, say, feet, it'd be 26 feet, all right? So in this one, notice that they give you the hypotenuse as 15, okay? So you start off with your Pythagorean theorem, and you substitute what you know, okay? They're telling you here that B you don't know, but 7 has to be what then? 7 has to be the A. So you have 15 squared equals 7 squared plus B squared. Square the 15 and the 7. Now you want to solve for B squared. So subtract the 49 and take the square root. So the square root of 176 is 13.27, rounded to 2 decimal places. Again, when you solve an equation and take the square root, you have to account that the number could have been positive or negative because it was squared, and when you square numbers, they always end up being positive. Unless it's 0, it's 0. But since we're dealing with side lengths of a triangle, you only take the positive answer, and the missing length is 13.27 units. Okay? Here's 2 for you to try. Go ahead and pause the video. Okay, we're back. So this one, 1a, you would have c squared equals a squared plus b squared. So I don't know c squared, and I'm going to say a is 6 and b is 8. So c squared equals 36 plus 64. So c squared equals 100. Square root both sides. So c equals plus or minus 10. So the missing side is 10 units. Okay, pretty cool there, huh? All right, in this one, you would have c squared equals a squared plus b squared. The 16 has to be the c because it's opposite the right angle, which makes it the hypotenuse. I don't know the a, so leave it as a squared, and the b has to be 12. So 16 squared is 256 equals a squared plus 12 squared is 144. So if you subtract the 144, you would get 112 equals a squared. Now you square root those. And the square root of 112 is about 10.58 plus or minus equals a. Again, since it's side length, the side length always has to be positive, so it's 10.58 units. Is the missing side. All right. And if you think about it, it makes sense that the missing side here would be smaller than the hypotenuse. Okay, so that's another way. In 1a, we had 10 for the hypotenuse, which makes sense because it should be the biggest of the three numbers. Okay, so if you're solving for the hypotenuse and you get an answer that's smaller than one of the two sides, you know you did something wrong. Likewise, if you're solving for one of the sides and you get a number that's bigger than the hypotenuse, you know you did something wrong. It might be bigger than the other side. Like if a was a number bigger than 12, it could still be a possibility as long as it wasn't bigger than 16. Okay? Alrighty. So the sail of a keel boat forms a right triangle as shown. Find the height of the sail. So here's the sail. And I know that the base of the triangle is 10 and the hypotenuse is 20. So this is just how you'd apply it in this situation. In this case, they didn't use A, B, and C, right? But I know that the hypotenuse squared is equal to the sum of the squares of the two sides. So I just did h squared plus 10 squared equals 20 squared. I could have done 10 squared plus h squared equals 20 squared. Same thing. Okay? So you'd have 400 equals h squared plus 100. Subtract 100. You have h squared equals 300. Take the square root. You only want the positive answer, so h equals 17.32. Since the problem is in feet, the sail is approximately 17.32 feet high. All right? Here's one for you to try. Go ahead and pause the video and hit play when you're ready to check it. All right, we're back. Suppose the longest side of a sail is 30 feet long and the shortest side is 14 feet. So here's the sail. What side is the longest side? Always the hypotenuse. Okay. And the shortest side is 15 or 14 feet long. Now, the way I drew it, it looks like this side is the shortest side. And you might have been thinking, well, how do I know if it's the vertical side or the horizontal side? Actually, it doesn't matter, okay? We can call this side W. Doesn't matter what you call that side. Just as long as one of the sides is 14, one of the legs, and one of the other legs is the variable, you'll be fine. Because it's always the hypotenuse squared equals the sum of the squares of the other two sides. You know 30 has to be the hypotenuse because they said it's the longest side. And you know 14 is one of the legs because they said it's the shortest side. Okay, so 30 squared is 900. 14 squared is 196. So you have 900 minus 196. You have 704 equals W squared. Take the square root. And you get 26.53 feet. Remember, you only want the positive square root. Now, think about this. This makes sense. The longest side has to be the hypotenuse, which is 30, and 26.53 is less than that. They told you that 14 is the shortest side, so your answer for W should be larger than 14. So your answer for W, you know before you even do anything, if you're thinking about it right, that W has to be somewhere between 30 and 14, which 26.53 is in between that. We seem to have done the steps correct, so we should be pretty confident in our answer here. Okay? All right, that's it for this first part. Stay tuned as we finish up this section. We'll see you there.